Hello everyone and welcome to the Green Man channel. I hope you're doing good and well. So it's time to do a video that I've been planning to do on this channel for a very long time. I've never actually sat down and recorded it. I've always wanted to do this. It's what a lot of other music YouTubers do, which is talk about their favourite gig experience or favourite concert experiences of all time. And I've got a top 5 here that I have thought about very carefully. And I think it's an interesting list of 5 because each one of these choices is a favourite gig for a slightly different reason. You know, in some cases it might be that it was the experience itself at the gig that meant I had an especially good time. Sometimes it might just have been a fantastic lineup. Other times it might have been one band that put on a particularly awesome performance. So there are different things happening here which make these experiences these concert experiences both memorable and my favourites as well. And the first one I'm going to talk about, which is effectively my number 5, is certainly one of the more interesting and one of the very recent gig experiences actually on this list. So this is going back only to 17th of September 2022, right in the days of the Green Man channel still. And this is Evergrey performing at 2T9, the venue in London. And this night is interesting for a particular reason, I guess, right? So Evergrey were delayed at customs. So the support act didn't actually play. Witherfall didn't play. Everybody that was queuing outside the venue was shifted to a bar next door to the venue to wait until Evergrey arrived, effectively, as I remember. That night at that bar, I met a girl who seemed very pleasant, and we, at the end of the night, actually, we exchanged numbers as well and had a great time. And that is part of the reason why this particular gig is my number 5, to be honest, because it's very rare at a metal gig for me to actually get a girl's number. Like, that is extremely rare, and this is possibly like the only time that's actually happened at a metal gig for me, so it's crazy. And you know, this gig, you have to remember, was like 99% men as well, so it felt like it was kind of an achievement for me that night. So it's kind of like, you know, there you go, that's part of the story for that one. But as it happens, Evergrey were also really great, considering they had been late. They were probably, you know, for me, would that kind of put you off as a musician? But no, not Evergrey. They still performed their songs, I thought, to an outstanding level. I love songs that they performed, like Recreation Day, which is one of my all-time favourites. They played a lot from their Heartless Portrait album at that time, which I really love that album. It was one of my favourites from 2022. So it's just a fantastic gig, with unexpected events leading to slightly unexpected things. And yeah, that's my number 5, that one. So there's an interesting start for you. And number 4, we have got the gig where I went to see a band called the Maccabees. They were headlining. This was at Alexandra Palace on the 8th of June 2012. For me, a great year. Now, this particular gig I ended up loving because of the support acts, not because of the headliners, the Maccabees. I do like the Maccabees, and I certainly liked them quite a lot back then. For those of you who don't know them, yeah, they kind of were pretty big back in like the early 2010s. I think I don't really listen to them much anymore, so I don't know what they're doing these days. But I felt like that kind of era, they were quite big in the indie scene. They were supported by British Sea Power, who have become one of my all-time favourite indie bands because their catalogue is great, I think. And they played so well that night. I instantly fell in love with their music, and it's why one of their albums is my all-time favourite albums. I just kind of shouted out on my list the other you know, very recently on my kind of albums of the year for every year. And it's just, it was such a good performance, playing some of their songs from Open Season, from Do You Like Rock Music, and albums like that. And it was mind-blowing. They performed so well, it slightly overshadowed the headliners for me that night. So that's Alexandra Palace, 8th of June 2012. Me seeing the Maccabees, but being blown away by the support act. And that is one of my favourite gig experiences. Coming in here at number 4. And coming in at number 3, we've got a Metallica gig that I saw with my friends back in 2007. This was a 22-year-old Green Man. And this was awesome. You know, you had Mastodon, Machine Head, him, and Metallica. At that time, I wasn't particularly into Machine Head. I kind of got into them a bit more. I've never been a massive Machine Head fan, to be honest, but I remember they were all right, but they weren't who I was there to see. I was there to see Metallica at that time. I happened to see Mastodon at that gig and was blown away by the Blood Mountain artwork on the stage, and that's how I got into that album. Of course, that became my album of the year for 2006. So there's one thing that makes this a memorable gig and why it's one of my all-time favourite gigs. But Metallica were great, and their set list was awesome. They played a lot of their old tunes. This was the Sick of the Studio tour in 2007. Didn't say the date. It was 8th of July 2007, as I remember. I don't have the ticket for this one still, so I'm not absolutely certain, but I think it was the 8th of July 2007. And yeah, me and my friends, we had such a good time. It's just one of those gigs that stands out in my memory as being a pretty great lineup. Metallica, you know, playing a set. This was the second time I saw them, but I remember enjoying it more than the first time. For whatever reason, when I saw them the first time, I think maybe it was the St. Anger era and tour, so that maybe has a slight impact that they were playing a few songs from that album. So the set list here was probably better. And it was just an amazing gig. This was at Wembley Stadium, I believe. It was certainly, yeah, it must have been Wembley Stadium. It was out in the open, as I recall. So that was a great gig in the summer of 07. Next up, my number 2 is Iron Maiden in 2013, when I had just moved into this flat for the first time. And no furniture was here. It was only the second night of moving in, if I remember rightly. I had to sleep in a sleeping bag in the bedroom, and you know, it's pretty much just a studio kind of flat here. I hadn't moved hardly anything in. It was all of that was still to happen, and I just remember the feeling of coming back after seeing Iron Maiden that night. It was the 3rd of August in 2013 in the O2 Arena in London. I remember coming back and rolling up and just feeling, wow, that was amazing. You know, if you think about Iron Maiden in 2013, was still, you know, that's still fairly recent and pretty late. But everyone says you need to see them live to really experience Maiden at their best. And actually, I thought Bruce Dickinson was outstanding. I thought the sound of that gig was fantastic. And they really, truly did blow me away that night, and played a lot of their 80s tunes, 80s songs and stuff from their 80s albums. So that was never going to fail for me, to be honest. That was never going to miss. That was always going to be a great gig. I feel like that gig was written in the stars. And what a way to start living in my new place as well, having a gig like that on your second night in your new, you know, coming back to my new place and sleeping in my sleeping bag, but not caring that I was sleeping on a hard floor when I'd just been to see that gig. And you know, what a fantastic night that was. My number 1 is from 2015. This was Megadeth. It was also not just Megadeth though. It was Lamb of God, Children of Bodom. And it was also Sylosis, one of my favourite bands of recent times. And this was at Wembley Arena, as I said, in 2015. I think it was the 14th of November. Now, why is that date significant? It was actually the night after the Bataclan terrorist attack in Paris. So there was quite a tense atmosphere in the arena, as I remember. And I remember that kind of like affecting, or certainly I remember, you know, it just giving an extra kind of tense atmosphere. But there was a certain defiance about that night and about the bands, the way they performed, not wanting, you know, what had happened that previous night, that terrorist attack, to affect anyone's enjoyment of music and the live music experience. So there's a real defiance about that night, and it was just the most incredible experience for me, being in that sort of, having this sort of, I feel like there was an extra level of atmosphere. Lamb of God, you know, they're not my favourite bands, and they're probably not even one of my favourite bands, to be honest, but live, they are something else. And their live performance was so good that even yours truly went right into the middle of the mosh pit. I got absolutely trashed in that mosh pit. I'm really a mosh pit person. I have been in mosh pits on occasion, but I rarely go in because I just know I'm going to get hurt. I'm not built like a particularly kind of, you know, tough person or anything, or, you know, muscular guys. So I just got absolutely trashed in that mosh pit. But I had a great time. I was like, I didn't care because the live music was so good and everyone was having such a great time. Lots of bruises the next day after that one, but it didn't matter to me because the music had been so good. Megadeth were also really good headlining that night, played some of my favourite tunes, Sylosis started, weren't on long enough for me because I love Sylosis. Children of Bodom, no, I remember Alexei, he was fantastic. This was just the night of a metalhead's dreams, to be honest, that night. And, you know, mosh pits, I can understand, they're definitely not for everybody, and they usually aren't for me. But for some reason that night, I just was like, screw it. This is such a great time. I don't care. And I'm going to take a risk. Throw myself into that mosh pit. See what happens. And yeah, it was pretty, pretty brutal. Not something as I'll probably ever do again, to be honest, not at this point in my life as a sort of nearly 40-year-old man. But, you know, you never know. Maybe I will feel that same rush to throw myself into a mosh pit again. But yeah, that could end with unwanted results. But yeah. So that was my favourite gig of all time in 2015. Just everything. I was with friends. It was just great atmosphere. It was, you know, there was just a real extra performance level from the bands I felt that night. 4 great acts: Megadeth, Lamb of God, Sylosis and Children of Bodom. That is why that gig from the 14th of November 2015 is my favourite gig of all time. And maybe it always will be. Who knows? It's going to take something to beat. So let me know what your favourite gig or gigs were, your top 5 maybe of all time in the comments. Or maybe if you're a YouTuber, do your own video, because I'm not sure I've actually seen some of my fellow YouTubers do their favourite gigs of all time yet. And if you have, I apologise, because maybe I just haven't watched them and that's something for me to do. But yeah, thank you very much for watching as always. If you're new to the channel and you like my kind of content, do drop a like and a sub. There's a bit of a win there. Until next time. Bye for now.